I met Carmen Tarnowski in the first trimester of my Alexander Technique training at the start of the pandemic. She had this quiet clarity in everything she did that stayed with me from day one. It's thanks to her that the Alexander School in Uruguay exists. She helped train the first generation of teachers and planted the seeds of this growing community, together with Mariana Di Paula. This is a small tribute to her life and legacy.
So, I suppose if I work at all with a triangle that I have worked with the technique, that what you've got is use. What you've got is use. And then, and we have been given certain tools to use. And it's strange because today we live more at a time where anything goes. But I feel one of the aspects of misuse is not using the right tool for the job. So, unless you have a severe problem, you don't walk on your hands, you walk on your legs, and you don't take anything, to your mouth. You use the arm and the shoulder and the hand, and so even though one might see anatomically that you use this muscle or that muscle or whatever, but basically speaking, I think it's because we use one function that nature has made, like handling, handling or walking or speaking, and we use those for other things.
Right.
So my particular studies I've always been interested is what does nature make to do this for us? So here, well, I suppose Alexander says ultimately it's about happiness. Your aim is happiness, but you don't get that through misuse. You might get temporary happiness through misuse, but you don't get anything that's substantial, lasting a long time. So one needs to know what are the tools that you've been given. And I've always been interested, that you can have people, they all look different, of course, but you take the first layer off and they're all the same. They have the same organs of action and the same organs of sense, And if they haven't, to me, it's no excuse for saying things should be different. That's just part of the isness of life, really, if you know what I mean. So where did I get to? And that's the fact that in order to give attention, stillness is your background requirement. Anybody that goes onto the stage and acts, and that's what Alexander did, knew that. And so there has to be this process of coming to some sort of stillness in order to be able to give attention, and it's almost like a prerequisite. What did I say? Anything else first time?
You said that habit was related.
Well, I said what I think I said was that one thing about the Alexander Technique is if you start with the body, that it is capable of bringing the body to a state of balance, equilibrium, stillness, where it starts to become capable of giving attention. Of course, in the process of learning to do that, you see how, you see some of the mischief that you get up to, in your mind and in your body, and especially with movement, because stillness is not meant to be a rock like out in the garden where they're doing the green. It's not meant to be a rock. It's meant to be, I suppose, a dynamic stage of equilibrium when you're in movement. And somehow or another, the way we learn to use ourselves in response to the stimuli of life, it's really reactionary, and it's copied, and it has so many ingredients, from custom, from language, from all these areas. But the dynamic equilibrium is the equilibrium that is a human equilibrium. I mean, those are the structures it's got to use. However, they're suitable to the individual. And so I sort of think, in a way, the technique is your starting point. And if you try and get somebody to be still, then they fix and hold. If somebody's sitting like this or something like that, they know that they shouldn't be down there. So you mention straightness or balance or uprightness or the dynamics of the body, and they take themselves up there. Well, what I've done by taking myself up there is put a lot of effort to overcome the inertia of the habit. Well, in doing that, that's fine, but I haven't let go of the energy that I put into it. So if I'm going to do that, I not only need to use the dynamics of the body to put myself in the direction of uprightness, I need to let go of what I don't need when I get there. Does that make sense to you?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And so, so one does sort of go from stillness into movement and from stillness into movement, and try and learn that way. Now, that I don't know how that relates to being a tool in your laboratory or, part of your toolkit.
Yeah, I mean, we're playing with attention through games that involve photography somehow.
Yes. Yeah,
So
I see.
So it's like, basically we propose different exercises that people can do, and like through the pictures that they take, we can kind of see how they're seeing.
Yes,
they can show us.
That, yes.
But yeah, the idea was to ask people that have been working with the body and the mind, and of course this mind-body unity, how this can make paying attention easier, and if there are any practical tools that are easy or not necessarily easy, but like simple enough for people to understand and apply to their daily lives.
Well, ultimately, it's all related to observation. So you've got this working together of the sensory system and the motor system. So through a dance, I work quite a lot with the eye and the hand. They're supposed to coordinate together in that system of dance. And so then we come back to the tools we've got. Now, attention is the thing you easily take for granted, because it's got, you live in a world of sensory objects, and you're responding to it all the time. And then if you try, from an Alexander point of view, to hold things still in order to pay attention, it creates a sort of fixation. Now, if you let it all go, and you refuse to use your reason, if I dare say that, I mean, because when Walter was describing the technique, he would describe it as being, a means whereby of restoring your primary control and your breathing. That's where he put it, by the use of inhibition, direction, and reason. And he said reason is the one people forget. And they are, a lot of people are in danger, especially at the beginning, of using feeling instead of reason. That feels right, or some word to that effect. And so Walter always used to say that's the least of the ones we should be using is our reason, especially when there's so much stimulus around all the time. It's not so easy, I mean, people are saying nasty things to other people, they're not telling the truth, there's stories going around on the internet, all these things, and to as it says, if you can keep your head when everybody around you is losing theirs. So it starts, I mean, I think the whole business of Mariana and I had quite a lot of talks about this, is first of all, as we are a whole human being, and if we believe in unity, you cannot separate concept from precept, So there was a movement at one time where you didn't talk about the concepts. Marianne and I were always talking about concepts because, you can have a concept of unity, but but are you looking unified? Are you unified in your thoughts and words and deeds? Now, ask me something else, and then I'll go.
So I was thinking about intentions.
Yes, intention.
Like intention and attention. Like, how do you think they play together?
Well, you have to. It is all to do with consciousness. Most people aren't conscious of what their intention is, and therefore they can't give the attention that is required to bring the effect that they're aiming for. So all of a sudden they start using the wrong direction because they know. So I think that if you use intention and direction as words, it is absolutely necessary to begin to understand the relationship between the word you're using and what it brings about. Because you don't know whether your intention is misfiring. It's that sort of thing, really. And so, people, Alexander said about being a psychophysical unity. I think it's more than that. It is that. That is what it is, but it's more. It's a whole attitude. The word attitude governs it well because it's it can be a place, it can be a posture, it can be, it can be something that you should be. You should have an attitude. And, so you should be balanced and upright, but not stiff. Balanced, upright, and moving in movement. But likewise, it's necessary to be able to be still as well. Now, have I missed out on intention and attention?
No, I think it was really cool.
They are different things. Your attention is given to the object of your intention. But where is it coming from? That was the stillness bit. Is it coming from the gathering together of the whole person in the present moment?
Yeah.
So, and then of course, I think it's important to the five senses. The five senses are all in use all of the time. One will be in dominance and the other. Even if I'm sitting here and I'm not walking, my legs are in use because my pelvis, which is morphologically part of the leg, is balanced on top of my hip joint. Well, it's not balanced on top of my hip joint, it's on the chair, but the base on which, the uprightness is there.
And sometimes we think of the pelvis as back rather than as leg.
Well, that's the way it's necessary to understand the language. If I use the word back, what I visualize, but it's not necessarily always visual, what is from the head, which comes right, morphology.
Yeah.
Yep. The morphology of the head is related to the fact that the specialization of the vertebra and the seeds of the bone, it's going all the way up from the coccyx, spinal, all the way up from the coccyx, right up to spread out over, to modify its shape in the skull. And so it goes over to here somewhere. But I'm not sure exactly where, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't stop there. And all these structures are, changing shape as we go. And the use and the function of the structure, those three getting together of use, function, and structure, I think applies to all creatures. It applies to those trees growing up there and a church that's been built there. That's all happening.
Yeah.
What's this? Oh, is it all right though? Yeah.
So, can you think of any anecdote from your childhood that would tell that you already were going to go in this way of life, like the Alexander Technique? And
yes, there's one I can remember when I was a child, and that was during the war. And I can remember being in church and somebody was giving a sermon, what children are like with sermons. But this chap said, well, God is everywhere. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? What does it mean? I think I believed that there was something, and that would have come from my grandmother, that sort of thing. So I would say that in one of the sort of directions in life has been to find out whether that was true or not. Is that an anecdote?
Yeah, that's a great anecdote.
Yeah.
So you were kind of skeptic of the regular beliefs of the time.
I was skeptic of the words in which they were put, and the way they were distributed. And the way they were put into practice. I was always skeptical about that. But I was never skeptical about the unity of it all. I don't think so. Not even as a bad-tempered little girl. Not really.
So your curiosity went towards,
What?
your curiosity took you towards finding out where is the essential part.
Well, I hesitate to put it this way. I don't know whether I can put it this way, but there's something about being a child that you know the truth of your existence. You know that you're all right. You can't understand why you're not all right. So, so life to a great extent becomes a resistance to being told that you're not. I mean, this is an Indian one, but being told that you're not perfect and you're not, you're not complete, you're lacking in some way, you're wrong in some way. Being given that as a base is not really very nice. It's very different than the Eastern tradition that anyway, in essence, is studied that, that the only thing's wrong is that somewhere or another, in the laboratory, you've not had the possibilities put in. So, this business is being told what you shouldn't be, rather than developing the possibilities of what you might be.
That's beautiful. And also, like, this coming into unity and being able to pay attention also helps you develop this potential, right?
Yes, it does. But it also does another thing, that if you have that sort of foundation, it brings forward the things that that you need to inhibit. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Can you explain?
Well, if you know what you should be, and then it starts to, and then as you grow older, you see what you're becoming, then that puts a question mark there. Do you see what I mean by that? Yes, it puts a question there. So, and a responsibility. If you inside don't believe you should be that, nasty, shout at somebody, sort of criticize people who are the way they should be. I mean, strongly critical as a youngster. People shouldn't be like that. And then if you're like that, then you have a responsibility not to be like that. It's not. Whereas at the beginning, you think, well, it's something that somebody needs to do. You've got your hands on them. They need to inhibit this. Well, do they? But by the practice of giving attention, you see what's really there. Then the things that you should inhibit can't stand. They can't stand against your own conscious appreciation. And they can show you what you haven't been attending to. I mean, it's the basic marital, he should be like that, she should be like that. And it's coming to enough clarity, the attention is coming to enough clarity to see things as they actually are, not according to your prejudices and I think that's a tough one, because it's going right into the heart of the mind. I mean, I've had, again, in the Eastern tradition, you have something that's called the undercurrent, the space of the mind. And it's not just what you're thinking. That's one level. It's what you're thinking. It's what you're deciding. And that's all the area of your direction, your intention, and then the choice that you're making of it, and then what you take into your heart. They're different actions. Whereas a lot of people think that the inner inner world is primarily just related to thoughts. And the thoughts are just a commentary on what's there. They're not truly.
So how do we get to the essential, like what's behind the thoughts? And
you have to wait. You have to wait. That's a part of the stillness. You have to be still long enough to see what's going on. And you have to accept that it's a lifelong journey. It's not 30 Alexander lessons. It's something, and it's a process that takes place in your embodiment, not somebody else's embodiment. And it just goes on. And just as you think you've got to a platform, you've got here, and I'm now an Alexander teacher, or I'm now a physiotherapist, or whatever it happens to be. And then if you're really watching, you see that that's just another platform. It's not a wrong platform, but it's where you are now going from, whereas you're not going from where you were going when you started, that sort of thing. But it's the difference in the functions of mind. So it's easy for us to see what we're thinking. But the deeper levels of the concepts that have taken root, or the feelings that have taken root, there's a lot of different faculties in the mind. Memory is another one, and so they're talking about having found a drug for starting to use with Alzheimer's. But in a way, it would be wonderful. And people that have been on the trials, they find it wonderful. But nobody's bothered to look at the tool, the tool of memory, what it involves on all levels of your being. It can be, what your religion told you, what your mother told you, what you ate. All these things, none of them is an exception to the attitude that you're having to deal with, which makes you, Tali, and me calm.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So those are the sorts of things. But unless you see these things for yourself, and of course, because you're Tali and I'm Carmen, you will see things that I won't see because they're not Tali or
Right.
And
can you think of a touching or like a moment that really moved you in this journey that you've been taking all your life? Like some moment where you moved out of a platform and something new started happening, or
not immediately, I can't, but there must have been. There must have been, because sometimes you just sort of feel these things of
change of state.
Yeah. Yeah. But that follows lots of things that have gone before. As if, like if we take something like thinking, the process of thinking as it's used in the Alexander Technique. I can remember suddenly putting my hands to my head, and I think I said it to Marion. I think I've been directing my head and neck and fixing it all this time. And by then I know I was 70 because that's how old I was when I went to South America. So because we've been talking, Marion and I, why Walter used to say, I don't know anybody that doesn't direct their head and neck and stiffen it. Oh, that's interesting. And then suddenly you find that what you've been doing is something physical, and the physical manifestation is fixed, and it does fix. But, rather than just being representative.
Right.
So you find so there's a whole world with attention of where your attention is going to, especially with the Alexander Technique.
Well, thank you. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to say?
So it's just being so alive to change that life can change you. You not try and change your life. That sort of thing. I can't say any more, Tali, because you say different things to different people, don't you?
Yeah, of course. No, it's fine.
But to the best of my ability, that's the truth of what I remember according to the questions you've asked.
Thank you so much.
You had tea yet?
No.
Oh, you have one before you go. You go, and all normal life is going on here.
Yeah.
Well, that to me is where the technique should be taking you.
Yeah, exactly. To be aware of everything, right?
But of the continuum. The fact that life goes on.
Yeah.
And it will go on. Whereas I was always thinking, the technique was giving me a tool for stopping life, stopping like that. And I realized that actually it should be taking you through something.